part of something larger than ourselves, a beloved community, a story unfolding across generations, across millennia, connected by, held by an interdependent web, the majesty of creation. In this remembering, may we find humility and be reminded that the world does not revolve around us, that we are not better than others. Remembering that humility is not a sign of weakness, but a source of profound wisdom and inner peace, paving the way for empathy, understanding, and compassion, and collaboration. With humility in our hearts, may we transcend our limitations and forge deeper connections as we work to expand the common good. In this spirit, we gather to worship, to learn, and to grow. I invite you now to rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing "For All That Is Our Life." It's number 128 in our gray hymnal. And of course, the words are on your screen as well. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. And I invite you to remain risen as we light our chalice and then say our covenant words together.
May the chalice flame remind us of the strength of humility, a virtue that calls us to bow before the vastness of life's mysteries, acknowledge our limitations, and embrace with joy the interconnectedness of all beings. And now please remain upstanding as we recite our congregational covenant, first in English, then in Spanish. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship. Thus do we covenant. La doctrina de esta iglesia es el amor. La búsqueda de la verdad es su sacramento. Y el servicio es su oración. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar el conocimiento en libertad, servir a la humanidad en comunión. Este es nuestro pacto. Good morning. and welcome to the weekly worship service of Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Todd Covert. I use he and him as my pronouns, and it is my privilege to serve as worship associate this morning. One bit of housekeeping before we go any further. Please be sure you've silenced your electronic devices, and thank you for supporting the well-being of this community by wearing a mask during the service. Emerson has been a welcoming congregation offering a home for open and inclusive spirituality in the West Valley for 70 years now. We proudly uphold the Unitarian Universalist values of love, equity, justice, and compassion. Here we hold to no creed and strive to be a place where you can bring your authentic, questioning mind and your expansive spirit. We welcome you, whatever your age, community of origin, gender identity, or affectional preference. Come as you are and be who you are and whoever you are becoming. Let us begin our service today by acknowledging that this church stands on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tataviam, Chumash, Tongva, and Quiche peoples. Forces of colonialism and imperialism and racism stole these lands and suppressed the languages and cultural traditions of those who lived here. We commit to honoring their elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and the culture of this our home. We're gathered today for worship both here in our physical sanctuary in Canoga Park and virtually via the Zoom app. To our members and friends joining us in both places, I extend a welcome and a thank you for your ongoing presence and support. This beloved community would be less without you, and your presence is always deeply felt and appreciated. If you're new to Emerson, and I know some of you are visiting us for the first time, I hope you find this service to be spiritually and intellectually engaging and that you feel welcome. We encourage you to sign either our physical guest book in the foyer or, if you're on Zoom, our virtual guest book linked from the chat. There you can sign up to receive both our weekly newsletter newsletter, which contains service announcements and also information about other Emerson program offerings, both here and online. Also in the Zoom chat, there should be a link to our virtual book of life where you can share any joy or concern you'd like shared aloud with the congregation during the service. And as always, those of you here in the sanctuary can share those same names or occasions via our physical book of life next to our music director, Kevin, behind the piano on the table. And if you'd like to get to know us better, please join us for our first Sunday potluck in our pavilion after the service. It doesn't matter whether you've brought an item to share, there will be plenty. And coffee, as always. And speaking of coffee, there's a virtual coffee hour for those of you on Zoom. There'll be breakout rooms after the service. I want to mention there are announcements, important announcements, on the back of our order of service. So if you don't have one and you want to grab one before the end of the service, I invite you to take a look at the announcements there. One of them I want to mention selfishly involves me. As Reverend Matthew's ministry here at Emerson draws to a close at the end of this month, we have a ministerial search committee that's been engaged by the Board of Trustees to identify and recommend a candidate for a one-year contract minister position. The members of the committee are named in the announcement on the back of the order of service. I'm one of them, and we welcome your input. Any of the named members of the committee here, I know Nicole is probably present on Zoom, and will be in the breakout rooms. Please, we welcome your feedback. And although today's service theme is humility, selfishly I want to say one thing, so please indulge me. Today marks my final time serving as a worship associate with Reverend Matthew in the pulpit after more than 5.5 years. I don't want to get too deeply into the sausage making of a Sunday service. These services don't plan themselves. But I've been fortunate enough to participate in planning Sunday services for more than 5.5 years. And more than that, I've been given the real privilege of being invited to preach from this pulpit and to teach, along with Reverend Matthew, our current sermon writing class. But But beyond that, the opportunity to explore our Unitarian Universalist principles and values deeply each time we plan one of these Sunday services is an absolute privilege. I'd say more than that, it's priceless. And so for that opportunity, with whatever comes in the future in mind, I want to thank you, Reverend Matthew, for this opportunity over the last 5.5 years. It's been a real privilege. There's more coming, I think. Sorry. That concludes my welcome, and I invite you now all, in a spirit of fellowship, to take a few moments to greet your neighbors.
Be nice. Yeah, it's true. That's right. Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My dog used to always get car sick and throw up in the car. That's right.
There we go.
That sounds great. Thank you.
It is good to be here. So, I'm the Reverend Matthew McHale, and it is my pleasure, and and my last month serving as minister here at Emerson, and it's been my pleasure, and I'm having feelings, so thank you for that indulgence. I wasn't necessarily preparing to almost cry, but I guess we'll see how things go. So this morning, I have a story that probably many of you are familiar with. You've heard of it, yes, that's great. It's an amazing story called Yertle the Turtle by Dr. Seuss. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I'm excited too. On the faraway island of Salamasond, Yertle the Turtle was king of the pond. A nice little pond. It was clean. It was neat. The water was warm. There was plenty to eat. The turtles had everything turtles might need, and they were all happy, quite happy indeed. They were, until Yertle, the king of them all, decided the kingdom he ruled was too small. "I'm ruler," said Yertle, "of all that I see, But I don't see enough, that's the trouble with me. With this stone for a throne, I look down on my pond, but I cannot look down on the places beyond. This throne that I sit on is too low down. It ought to be higher, he said with a frown. If I could sit high, how much greater I'd be. What a king! I'd be ruler of all I could see. So Yertle the Turtle King lifted his hand, and Yertle the Turtle King gave a command. He ordered 9 turtles to swim to his stone, and using these turtles, he built a new throne. He made each turtle stand on one's back, and he piled them all up in a 9-turtle stack. And then Yertle climbed up. He sat down on the pile. What a wonderful view! He could see almost a mile. All mine, Yertle cried, all the things I now rule. I'm king of a cow, I'm king of a mule, I'm king of a house, and what's more, beyond that, I'm king of a blueberry bush and a cat. I'm Yertle the Turtle, oh, marvelous me, for I am the ruler of all that I see. And all through that morning, he sat there up high, saying over and over, a great king am I, until long about noon, then he'd heard a faint sigh. What's that? Snapped the king, and he looked down the stack. And he saw at the bottom a turtle named Mac, just a part of his throne. And this plain little turtle looked up and he said, Beg your pardon, King Yertle, I've pains in my back and my shoulders and knees. How long must we stand here, your majesty, please? Silence! The king of turtles barked back. I'm king and you're only a turtle named Mac. You stay in your place while I sit here and rule. I'm king of a cow and I'm king of a mule. I'm king of a house and a bush and a cat. But that isn't all. I'll do better than that. My throne shall be higher, his royal voice thundered. So pile up more turtles. I want about 200. Turtles, more turtles, he bellowed and brayed. And the turtles weighed down in the pond were afraid. They trembled, they shook, but they came. They obeyed. From all over the pond they came swimming by dozens, whole families of turtles with uncles and cousins, and all of them stepped on the head of poor Mac. One after the other they climbed up the stack. Then Yertle the Turtle was perched up so high he could see 40 miles from his throne in the sky. Hooray, shouted Yertle. I'm king of the trees, I'm king of the birds, and I'm king of the bees. I'm king of the butterflies, king of the air. Ah, me, what a throne, what a wonderful chair. I'm Yertle the Turtle, oh, marvelous me, for I am the ruler of all I can see. Then, again, from below, in the great heavy stack, came a groan from that plain little turtle named Mac. Your Majesty, please, I don't like to complain, but down here below we are feeling a great pain. I know up on top you're seeing great sights, but down at the bottom we too should have rights. We turtles can't stand it. Our shells will all crack. Besides, we need food. We are starving, groaned Mac. You hush up your mouth, howled the mighty King Yertle. You've no right to talk to the world's highest turtle. I rule from the clouds, over land, over sea. There is nothing, no, nothing that's higher than me. But while he was shouting, he saw with surprise that the moon of the evening was starting to rise up over his head in the darkening skies. What's that? Snorted Yertle. Say, what is that thing that dares to be higher than Yertle the king? I shall not allow it. I'll go higher still. I'll build my throne higher. I can and I will. I'll call some more turtles. I'll stack them to heaven. I need about 5,607. But as Yertle the Turtle King lifted his hand and started to order and give the command, that plain little turtle below in the stack, That plain little turtle whose name was just Mac decided he'd taken enough, and he had. And that plain little turtle got a little bit mad, and that plain little Mac did a plain little thing. He burped. And his burp shook the throne of the king. And Yertle, the turtle, the king of the trees, the king of the air and the birds and the bees, the king of a house and a cow and a mule, well, that was the end of the turtle king's rule. For Yertle, the king of all Salamasond, fell off his high throne and fell plunk in the pond. And today the great Yertle, that marvelous he, is king of the mud. That's all he can see. And the turtles, of course, all the turtles are free, as turtles and maybe all creatures should be. The end. So today, our service, we're exploring the topic of humility and also pride or self-centeredness. And so Yertle, he just doesn't think about anyone other than himself, right? But I love the way it ends with a reminder that everyone, once that stack falls, all the turtles are just there in the pond together at the same height, all equal. And that's actually part of what humility is remembering that we are no better or worse than anyone else, that we all have rights and worth and dignity. And so that's one of the many reasons that I love that story. And now I invite you to join me in saying our Unitarian Universalist affirmation. If you know the hand motions, you can do them with me. Even if you don't, they're pretty easy to pick up. We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. As I turn up the collar on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street with not enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their needs? A summer's disregard, a broken bottle top, and a one-man soul. They follow each other on the wind, you know, 'cause they got nowhere to go. That's why I want you to know I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. I've been a victim of a selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize there's some with no home, not a nickel alone. Could it be really me pretending that they're not alone? A willow deeply scarred, somebody's broken heart, and a washed out dream. They follow the pattern of the wind, you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself, then make that change. Oh yeah, I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself, then make a change. Gonna make a change for once in my life. I have to say, it was such a privilege and a pleasure to sing that. That song was on the very first album that I ever owned. That was my own album. And so when Eloise said, we're going to sing Man in the Mirror, and then mentioned, hey, would you like to sing on it? I was like, oh my God. So what a pleasure to be able to sing that and to sing with the choir this morning. Truly a blessing and an honor. Each week, we take up a special collection and share the plate with an organization that is doing good work in the community. This month, we're sharing the plate with the West Valley Food Pantry, which we have been partners with for, I think, about 30 years, or almost 40 years now. And as many of you know, this year, the West Valley Food Pantry is undergoing a major expansion. They're adding a new building to increase their capacity in terms of what they are able to do. And while that has been really successful, one of the consequences of that is that donations for their main services, which is providing food, have been lower than average. And so I invite you, as we take our collection, to give generously, to think about that song, Man in the Mirror, with its talks about people on the street with not enough to eat. Those are those people that are served each day, each week, each month by the West Valley Food Pantry. And so I invite you to please give generously. You can make your donations via the Breeze mobile app or by going to donate.emersonuuc.org. Or if you're writing a check, you can make it out to Emerson UUC or just EUUC and write Share the Plate in the memo. If you are making a payment on a pledge, you can also do that. Just make sure to write pledge in the memo. Our offerings will now be gratefully received.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Each week we take time in our service to lift up those joys and sorrows from within our congregation and in the wider world. This week in our virtual, or in our book of life, nothing but I will note. So as you can see, we have, this was the space we had set aside, left in this book for today. Didn't have anything. We have something in the virtual book of life. And so next Sunday, we are going to have a new book of life and have a little ritual, a ceremony to honor all that has been written in here as we retire this book and all that it holds in it again next week. And in our virtual book of life this morning, Nicole writes a concern that her brother and sister-in-law are bearing the lion's share of caring for her mother, who is receiving hospice care at home. They can use all the positive energy and well wishes we can afford. Our hearts go out also to the people living with violence in so many places around the world, and hopes in particular that we might have some peace, a ceasefire in Gaza in the coming weeks, hoping, as I know many of us have been for months upon months, for an end to the violence. I also want to lift up the people of Papua New Guinea, where many people, more than 1,000, maybe 2, may have been lost in landslides earlier this week. In a moment, I'm going to sound this singing bowl. And after I do, I invite you to speak aloud into this space or type into the chat, if you're joining us online, any joys or sorrows, any names or occasions that are on your heart this morning and that you would like lifted up into this community in this, our embracing meditation. All that has been shared and all that we hold in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. We offer these into the embrace of this beloved community. I invite you to join me now in a spirit of meditation or prayer as I offer these words adapted from the Reverend Paul Beadle. Spirit of life and love, justice and peace. The spectacle of foolish pride is ever before us in these times. Indeed, pride has seldom looked so foolish in our lifetimes. So many people in positions of public trust and responsibility have lost their authority and confidence spectacularly. And still they persist in their pride. They lie, they brag, they evade, they lecture. And they seem not to know that this makes matters worse. Yet the example of the humble is also before us. Indeed, humility has seldom looked so wise. So many people in positions of public trust and responsibility who otherwise would not attract our notice have gained authority and our confidence by unspectacularly acting with honor. They persist in seeking truth, being accountable, stepping up to their duties with courage, asking the right questions. And without centering themselves, they seem to know that this matters. Seldom has the contrast between foolish pride and honest humility been set so clearly before us. Come what may, O Spirit of life, may we have enough humility that we need never be humbled. May we have enough compassion that we are never tempted to humiliate. May we have enough forgiveness that neither the humbled nor the humiliators, which are all so much more, are ever outside the circle of our love. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, so may it be. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be. This morning, for our sung meditation, we're going to do, I guess I would call it a mashup of 3 different songs. Om Mani Padme Hum is a Sanskrit phrase which has been interpreted to mean many different things. The current Dalai Lama suggests that the 6 syllables, Om Mani Padme Hum, mean that by following the Buddhist path, you can transform your impure body, speech, and mind into the pure, exalted body, speech, and mind of a Buddha. And part of that path is the practice of humility. So combining that chant with a Shaker song about coming down where you ought to be, and a song about grace lifting up a man from a wretched life to one of vision and meaning, we come to an understanding of the transformative power that humility can have in our lives by leading us towards a life of increased meaning and purpose. If all of that was too complicated, that's fine. You can just enjoy the sound of it. And so what we'll do, we'll start with the chant. And I'm going to invite David and Eloise up to help in leading this. And so we're going to add each one in as we go. We'll give you a little bit of a cue on where that is. And then we'll go out in the same order. So we'll start with Om Mani Padme Hum, then with Simple Gifts. The lyrics are there on the screen. We don't have enough space for Amazing Grace. If you don't know the lyrics, you can just keep singing either one of the other ones. You don't have to switch through the song. So we'll want some people to keep singing that Om Mani Padme Hum throughout. If you want to keep singing Simple Gifts, and then we'll add in Amazing Grace. We'll sing Amazing Grace once, sing Simple Gifts one more time, so 3 times on Simple Gifts, and then end all together with Om Mani Padme Hum. All right.
Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Om Mani Padme Hum.
Amazing grace, how sweet
Mani Padme
the sound
Om Mani Padme
that
Om
saved
Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Om Mani Padme Om Mani
was
Padme
lost, but I see
Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum.
tis the gift
Mani Padme Hum.
tis the gift
Mani Padme Hum.
tis the gift to
Mani Padme Hum.
where we are
Mani Padme
and when we find ourselves in the place just right to be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bed we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum.
Today's service theme is the exercise of humility in a self-centered culture. So naturally, I'm going to tell you a story about me. Today happens to mark exactly 6 years since I first came to a Sunday service here at Emerson. I had made a decision to return to the Unitarian Universalism of my youth after many years exploring other paths. A major impetus for returning was burnout after a number of years of leadership in a large pagan denomination. I felt at that time, been seduced away from the spiritual side of my paganism by the lure of administrative leadership. So I was determined to leave my ego outside the church this time and to sit quietly in the back row, spiritually recharging. And yet, here I stand. The ego is a truly powerful thing. But that wasn't the story. This is the story. Once upon a time, I studied to be an actor and then a stage director. Early in my actor training, I decided not to pursue acting as a profession, shifting my emphasis fully to directing. Ultimately, I realized that I didn't have the confidence that in a room full of actors all approximating my type, that I would be the one that they would pick. Which is really just to say I didn't trust my ego to be resilient enough to weather years of inevitable rejection. I've never regretted that decision, and over the years I've gotten the occasional paying gig on stage or on camera. But as I ultimately pursued stage directing and then assistant directing for film and television, I was lucky enough to work with and sometimes get to know successful Hollywood actors and directors, and to observe the ways that their egos interacted with their careers, for better or sometimes for worse. Many of us have internalized the mythology of the hard-drinking star or the difficult diva clinging to her fading glamour. During my roughly 8 years working as an assistant director in LA, I worked with my share of both, honestly. There's something about fame that, understandably, I guess, can further inflame the ego. But some of the most gracious people that I worked with on Hollywood sets were among the most famous and influential. Steven Spielberg. Oh, excuse me, let me pick that name up. Steven Spielberg, who called me over to make sure that we invited the family on whose lawn we had staged some gear to join us for lunch. Angela Lansbury, despite her age and her responsibilities as both a star and an executive producer when I worked with her, made sure that a guest star, a friend of hers who had recently lost his beloved wife of many decades, was not kept waiting for her on set, insisting that we cut short her customary interval of rest and preparation. It'd be nice to think that the humble and generous in spirit are always rewarded, but we know better, don't we? I worked for almost a year on a TV series featuring a star who was well known for being difficult. Spoiler alert, he was. On that show, there were two directors who had opposite temperaments. One was a thoroughly professional and polite TV veteran who described himself as a mere footage delivery specialist. On the other hand, another director of multiple episodes was a well-known movie star transitioning from acting to directing, who kept the entire crew waiting once while he recited a lengthy poem by Baudelaire from memory. It was a fascinating poem, but we still had many hours ahead of us before we could get home to our families. But the actor I think I remember best in the context of ego and humility, I worked with on a really lousy direct-to-video movie. He had once worked alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger in a co-starring role, and for famous directors like David Cronenberg comes to mind. But in this case, he had been hired for a couple of days' work as a secondary bad guy on a movie that might very well never be seen. I had an opportunity to talk to him one night during a long setup. He spoke unreservedly about his recovery from alcoholism. He made no bones about the reality of having drunk himself out of a career. He accepted that he was in a place he had chosen for reasons of his making. He was humbled, but not broken. Years of commitment to his recovery and a surrender to the higher power that he acknowledged had granted him the serenity he needed. But despite that surrender and the recognition of powerlessness in the face of his addiction, he remained the charismatic and capable performer I'd seen in numerous past performances. I will never forget that conversation with him that night. Thinking about my own struggle with the lure of ego, it seems that humility, that is to say, a healthy mastery of ego, isn't the same as denying one's ego, let alone losing one's sense of self-worth. The goal, I guess, is to master the ego and not be mastered by it, subject to its unconscious whims. A healthy, authentic humility allows a recognition of the worth of all people, including yourself.
A few months ago, as I was thinking about the possible ending of my ministry at Emerson before it was certain, I often had this thought, what will they do without me? Who will do such and such after I'm gone? How will the congregation manage? In part, it was a feeling of concern and of making sure I hand things off well. But it was also about ego. And then, inevitably, I would check back in and go and put my ego in check. No, they will figure it out. They did it when I was on sabbatical. And this congregation has had many other ministers in its 70 years. And I will have been minister for only barely more than 10% of its history. And there will be new ministers after me who will have different strengths and different skills than me and can even help the congregation grow in ways that perhaps I can't, my skill set can't help. And more importantly, there is all of you. This whole congregation, we talk about shared ministry because it is the whole congregation who performs so many of the tasks day in and day out, visibly and subtly recognized and unrecognized, that keep the congregation running. This congregation has always been far more than its minister. Indeed, it didn't have one for its first few years. And I know in my heart of hearts that you will be fine. Yeah, it comes out of this thought comes out of this feeling of self-importance. And sure, some of it is, I think about some of the things that I'm passionate about, which the next minister probably is less likely to spend a couple hours gardening each week, or maybe not want to preach sermons based on movies. Now, I think this might be one of the less harmful manifestations of pride or egoism, of thinking highly of yourself, compared to being selfish or self-interested, which is the other part of it. But even that pride is still about elevating our importance over someone else. So maybe I should be asking myself, what sort of wisdom do I even have to offer you this morning? Is what I have to say more meaningful than someone else's? Should I just step away and say, Who else wants to say something? No. One of my approaches, though, to leading worship is that I'm not the only one who has wisdom to share, and that's why you often hear worship associates or others offering their own reflections, like Todd's today. Sometimes they are even better than what I have to offer. And it's why I'm so excited for you to hear the sermons being developed by lay leaders in the sermon writing and preaching class that Todd and I are co-leading, which you will have the privilege of hearing throughout this summer. But in truth, I know that I'm actually pretty good at crafting worship. It's one of my strongest skills as a minister, whereas there are others that have been and continue to be areas of growth for me. And even then, I know that I don't, that even in worship, there is always more for me to learn. There's always skills to be built. And to that point, I think I've become a better preacher than when I started here, just as our worship associates have become better writers and speakers as they hone their craft. A key part of humility is knowing that we can still grow, that we don't know everything, that we have something to learn. The other important aspect of humility is recognizing maybe our smallness, our ordinariness in the grand scheme of things. Because we are stuck up here in our heads with our own thoughts, it can be easy to just think about ourselves as the center of attention. That's something that all kids do. That's something they have to learn, right? We all had to learn at some point that other people are autonomous and have their own thoughts, and the world does not, in fact, revolve around us. But that lesson is always difficult to learn. And yet, humility is so important, which is why I think it's one of the core teachings across so many religions. There's a story from Hasidic Judaism where a pious man visits the Baal Shem Tov, who founded the Hasidic Judaism, and says to him, "Oh, I have labored long and hard in the service of God, yet all my labors have not improved me. I am still an ordinary, ignorant person." And the Baal Shem Tov responds, "You have come to understand that you are ordinary and ignorant. This is no small accomplishment." Now, the root for humility is humus, which is the Latin word for earth. Now, one can think of that as plain and boring, but also know that earth can be thought of as a rich and nutrient-filled soil. It's also, humus is also the root word for human. And in all of the Abrahamic faiths, God makes the first human out of earth. That's why we get that name. And so humility is derived from the broader word humilitas, one who is grounded or near to the earth. So perhaps it's no surprise that one of the greatest stories of arrogance or hubris is the Greek myth of Icarus, who flies on wings made of wax and feathers made by his father Daedalus. And Daedalus warns Icarus not to fly too close to the sun or the wax will melt. But Icarus, caught in the moment, flying high, soaring, ignores the warning and flies too high. The wings fall apart and Icarus falls into the sea and drowns. What better metaphor for the dangers of not being grounded is there than dying from flying too high? But the other part of the story that is largely forgotten or ignored, frankly, I did not know it until I was looking it up yesterday, is that Daedalus also warns his son to not fly too low, lest the wings become damp with seawater and get weighed down. And I think this is the complexity of pride and humility. You know, pride is considered one of the 7 deadly sins, something that I think probably many of us have a hard time grasping in this day and age. And also thinking about pride, this month, of course, is Pride Month, where we celebrate LGBTQ liberation. It's about celebrating an identity for people who were too often told they were less than. So sometimes I think pride is helpful. It depends on the context. And so humility isn't just about lowering one's self. It's also about putting everyone on the same level, about seeing us all as equal. Humility, being humble, does not mean bearing all things and seeing yourself as lesser than. An ex of mine who I met at a UU church had grown up in a Protestant church, and we were talking about why she left. And she told me that kind of the breaking point was after hearing a prayer about not being worthy to gather the crumbs under God's table. And that rubbed her the wrong way. This is known as the prayer of humble access. And frankly, if that's what it means to be humble, to not be worthy to eat crumbs, I might balk at humility too. And I think there's a danger, and I think that's what many of us are reacting to. In the book Proverbs of Ashes, the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker recounts being a young minister back in the 70s or 80s. And a young woman walks into her church and wants to talk to her and asks if it was okay that her husband physically abused her, because she had talked to her priest, who had said that suffering would bring her closer to God, for she would be like Jesus on the cross. And this woman knew there was something wrong with this line of thinking, and so part of the reason she went to Dr. Parker is because she knew she was a female minister at a time when there weren't many. And for Dr. Parker, part of the book is uncovering and unpacking the theology, the harmful theology that even though she knew, of course, this woman shouldn't be suffering, that was not what God wanted. But that is something of that suffering brings one closer to God that she had preached. And so that started to reshape her whole way of thinking. And so I get that tension about ordinariness and acknowledging our ordinariness and honoring our self-worth and dignity. Another Jewish sage, Rabbi Simcha Bunim, once said, "Keep two truths in separate pockets always, and take them out as needed. And the first is, for my sake the world was created. And in the second, I am but dust and ashes." Again, evoking that idea of humans as part of the earth, of something simple. In Hinduism, the greeting is namaste, which means I bow to you, literally. And in Hinduism, it has an additional meaning of I bow to the divine in you, meaning that all of us are divine, all of us are equal. In Buddhism, similarly, that bow is an act of humility, seen as a cure for negative attachment to ego and pride, which is essential to the path of enlightenment. As Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th and current Dalai Lama, has said, "I am nothing special. I'm just an ordinary monk." And so there are two aspects of humility, really. An ability to accurately acknowledge one's own limitations and abilities. Not that we have to be less than, not that we can't take some pride in our skills, but to just have an honest assessment, knowing that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And then the other aspect is a way of relating to people that is more focused on the other than on the self. Now these days, as Todd mentioned, as I mentioned, humility is not particularly popular. I'd say there was a study, and they say maybe 10 to 15% of people in this culture have a strongly identify as humble. And this has been going on, David Hume, the Scottish philosopher who was a peer of Adam Smith, who developed the theory of capitalism, talked about humility as one of the monkish virtues, and he did not mean that as a compliment. To him, it meant we were limiting ourselves. And so, that by engaging in this, we were neither advancing a man's fortune in the world nor rendering him a more valuable member of society. And humility has been falling out of favor ever since. These days, we live in a society that's about promoting oneself. Maybe the most salient recent example, or one of them, is thinking about being like a social media influencer or internet personality, which is so often about shameless self-promotion. And sometimes it means thinking that you're God's gift to the world, or at least acting like you are, because people like that. And so now young people aspire to be influencers and internet personalities these days. But before I can you believe the kids these days? This, of course, is just the latest iteration of celebrity. How do you not let it get to your head? All those people who love you or love the curated version of you that's shared with the world. Or look at the realm of politics. A belief that I can do this, I should do this, I can do this better than those people can. I deserve this. Unfortunately, too many people are inspired by this line of thinking. I love the people who run for office because other people who know them and have worked with them say, hey, I see something in you. I think you should run. Not that people who have an outsized sense of ego can't be great leaders, because they can. But having an inflated sense of self is different. Acknowledging one's own skills and gifts is different. That is, in fact, humility of a certain sort. And if you already have fame or lots of money, you may be able to attain political office, though you may be unskilled. The world's biggest YouTuber, a feat that apparently he achieved today exactly, with 268 million subscribers to his channel, Jimmy Donaldson, aka Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast has said a couple years ago that he thought he might run for president in about 20 years. And frankly, sadly, I would not count out the possibility of him winning these days. You may have noticed what I haven't mentioned. I'm sure you can infer it from this week's news. I'll leave it at that. There have been studies recently, and as I'm wrapping up, Dr. Elizabeth Kumrai Mancuso did several studies on intellectual humility. And she discovered that people who are intellectually humble are aware that of the incompleteness or fallibility of their ideas about social issues and politics. And they found that this intellectual humility doesn't actually bear any correlation with IQ. It doesn't have anything related to one's intelligence as much as IQ is a measure of intelligence. Instead, intellectual humility is strongly linked with curiosity and reflection and open-mindedness, things we would all do well to cultivate. And Dr. Daryl Van Tongeren, another researcher who studies humility, has talked about the pro-social elements of humility. Because humility, having a humble attitude, can help us to shake off grudges, to suffer fools patiently, and to forgive oneself. And so it's through the act of humility, countercultural though it may seem, that we can grow. It indeed is one of, I would say, the great spiritual values. Perhaps especially in this world. Humility is about not finding fault in others, but acknowledging our own shortcomings, as well as our strengths. Pointing to that, looking at that man in the mirror if we want to change. Humility is a middle path. It's not to be passive or to let people walk all over you. Being humble is rooted in acknowledging our ordinariness, yet also being willing to defend our worth and dignity, and to stand up for the worth and dignity of another when it is under threat. And so, through the practice of humility, may we learn and grow and make the world a better place. May it be so. I invite you now to rise in body or in spirit and join me in singing our closing hymn, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea. It's number 4 in your gray hymnals. I think this is one we're not unfamiliar with, but it's a lovely tune. So Kevin's going to play it once through.
I'll play once through.
I brought my spirit to the sea and stood upon the shore. I gazed upon the infinity and heard the waters roar. And then I came a sense of ease. Some whisper calmed my soul. Some ancient mystery of stars has made my spirit whole. I brought my spirit to the trees that loomed against the sky. I touched each wandering, careless breeze. Oh, if God was nigh. And then I felt an inner flame that fiercely burned my tears. A bright arrows from bended knee to meet the asking.
Normally, I would have done the announcements before the hymn. I know the service is running long, so we'll extinguish our chalice, and then I'll have a couple of announcements if those of you need to go. But as our service comes to a close, I invite you to reach out, to make a connection, whether that's joining hands or bumping elbows or touching a shoulder, as you feel comfortable. To those of you joining us on Zoom, I invite you to send your energy out to us here in the sanctuary and to each other as we send ours back to you. I offer you these words from the Reverend Mark Bellatini, adapted. Go in peace. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly. Speak justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not your hand of charity. Practice humility. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all people in the world, beginning with yourselves, and go as you go with the dream of that peace alive in your heart. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be. And so now a couple quick announcements. As Todd mentioned earlier, we have our first Sunday potluck. All are welcome to join, whether you brought food or not. Next Sunday is our congregational meeting following the worship service, so we hope you join for that. We'll be voting on the budget and having some reports and other things. And also we have an event coming up later this afternoon, which we have some friends to tell us about.
Hi, so I will introduce my music teacher, Miss Teresa, and I would like to invite all of you to my concert later today at 2 o'clock.
Here.
Yes. So I'm Teresa Young. I'm connected to the Norwood and Green families, 3 generations. And they will be, Miss Charlotte will be singing and playing a little later. Alexa will be singing. Her big sister Amber and Amber's son Oliver will be playing. I personally am blown away by your community, by your service, by your space, by your covenant, and that's why we decided we wanted to come do this. We're hoping it could maybe be a prototype for maybe some quarterly open mics or something that's your event, not my event, but maybe my students and families help to seed it. So they will be here if you want to come at 2 p.m., hear some really sweet music, say hello to some visiting families, and maybe imagine yourself participating next time. So 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have another concert coming up. These are totally out of order. Coming up in a couple weeks, Friday, June 1st, 21st, Roy Zimmerman, who some of you know. He's played music in our services and also done a couple concerts here. He's a wonderful singer in the folk activist tradition. He's going to be playing here. It's a joint fundraiser with Emerson. And as the tagline goes, sing, laugh, and defend democracy. And I think many of us could use some inspiration during these tumultuous political times. So, all right, let's have a potluck.
one note. I sure was allowed.